Hello. Today I'm going to be discussing whether or not Xenlon, the real-time arena terror, is in fact overpowered, or if he's just really good. If you've interacted with me on the Discord, you may already know my opinion on this, but I'm going to try and keep it, objective and unbiased. And yeah, I'm also going to discuss like some meta stuff, like just so we can understand Xenlon's place within it. So even if you don't care much about Xenlon, you can still maybe learn some stuff from this. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, well, first of all, one of the most obvious and basic things is he's hard to kill. One awake, he has 3 wishes, which is 50% damage barriers. Obviously that makes it extremely difficult to, well, pretty much impossible to one-shot him. You need something significantly powerful to do that. Can also be, difficult to kill even after you've broken one of the barriers, 2 of the barriers, depending on your turn order. If you have your multi-hit attackers going last and your single-hit attackers going first, it can be really difficult to kill him. He has a way to heal himself. He has Godly Breath, which is typeless breath, really powerful. It's going to heal him up 600, 800 HP generally, so if he gets that off, it can heal him out of range of being killed by other things. And if you are lucky enough to have an Awakening 5 Xenlon, I'm not. Also, apologies if it's Xenlon and not Xenlon, but I say Xenlon, so you're going to have to deal with that. But yeah, if you have Dragon Scale, every time you have to hit him, he's going to be healing off that, and obviously with 3 damage barriers, you're going to have to hit him probably quite a few times to actually kill him, so this is a lot of healing potential he has. But, just being hard to kill doesn't make something overpowered, because in fact there is another unit that has 50% damage barriers and heals and hit every time it's hit, and that's Mordegon. And I think we can all agree that Mordegon is far from overpowered. He's in fact severely underpowered. So there's got to be a bit more going on here than just being difficult to kill. Which brings me on to my next point, which is hard to CC. Now you may be thinking, well, Xenlon's weak to stun, how can he be weak to CC? And I'll get into that in a sec, but first of all I've broken down each status type into its own column here. Over here we have 2 turn action loss, which is Sleep, Confusion and Charm. These are the most powerful statuses in the game. They're going to take control away from your unit for 2 turns, which is usually going to be a death sentence for them. After that we have the 1 turn action loss, Paralysis and Stun. That's going to be 1 turn taken away. Could be enough to kill them, maybe not. After that we have locks. These are going to be dependent on the unit it's landed on, how effective they are. Obviously if you land Breath Lock on a Xenlon, that's going to matter a lot. If you land it on a Sorrow, it's not going to matter at all. Same with Bind. It depends the sort of range they have and whether they need to move much to do much. And then finally we have Miscellaneous, which is, these are either unreliable or don't really negate a unit from doing much. And usually, like, if you get hit by these things, they're probably not going to, they can come into play, and if they do, they're annoying, but they're probably not going to affect much. And so I've highlighted with this key here what stuff Xenlon is weak to, and as you'll see, pretty great. He is, of the 3 most powerful statuses in the game, he is immune to one of them, and he half resists one of them, and the other one, Charm, is extremely rare. So most of the time, you're not going to be able to put Xenlon out of action for 2 turns. Unless you're running Summer Jessica, you're probably not charming him. Unless you get lucky, you're not sleeping him, and you are never confusing him. So essentially you're never going to have 2 free actions to kill Xenlon. Your next best option is 1 turn action loss, Paralysis and Stun. Stun he is weak to, so if you have an option that is 50% base, then you can guaranteed stun him. Or you can go for a Paralysis, which, with Burning Breath, you can get up to about 60% chance. In terms of locks, the only relevant lock here would be Breath Lock, which is only on 1 unit, as far as I know. It's on Bulldozer and A rank, and he actually half resists that, so it's not really relevant. Physical Lock, Spell Lock, Martial Lock, he doesn't have any of those types. Bind could be relevant, but with the range Xenlon has, even if he's bound, he can probably still do something. He has a 4-range Godly Breath, he has Aurora Breath, which is a large fan. So that's not too relevant. And then Miscellaneous, Poison, Blind and Curse. Poison does have a key, it is decent versus Xenlon, especially because when he actually takes a hit from Poison, it will actually break one of his barriers, so that's something to note, but it's not something that's going to actually prevent him from attacking, which is what, ideally you'd want to do versus Xenlon and his damage potential. So, if we go over that again, really your best options, if you want something reliable, are Stun. Stun's about the only reliable thing you can do, and then you have a decent chance to do it if you have a Burning Breath scroll, 60% paralysis. If you have Summer Jess, you have a 60% charm, or Godmir's Side Spark, 60% charm, and then you can try and sleep, but that's going to be cap out at 30% generally, not very reliable. And if we think about it, if you really think about who the stun options are in the meta, that are actually meta that you see quite often, there's Edric, and that's about it. Stun is an extremely uncommon status to carry, and the units that do carry it that are actually good also don't have it guaranteed. Erdrick's stun chance is only 40%. On a weak target that's only 80%. That means 1 out of 5 times he's not going to stun Xenlon, and if you tried to stun Xenlon and you failed to do it, odds are you're probably going to lose the match after that. There are units that have a guaranteed stun. Maya recently released. We're not sure what her place in the meta will be yet, but she could be. If she is a strong meta pick, then she's going to be a good threat to Xenlon. You have Gildigger. He has a guaranteed stun, but again, he's not really meta relevant. I haven't seen him in like the past 500 games of real-time arena I've played. Halloween Veronica. I've seen one person running her. Her stun is Frizz type, but I suppose that is an option. But again, it's not very common. You have Mecha Miner, which I would say is actually more meta-relevant than anything else other than Erdrick. It's an E rank, you slap it on any team easily, has a 40% stun chance, has the possibility of going multiple times in a turn with follow-ups. However, he is super slow, so he also has a miss chance. But I'm trying to think, is there anybody else? I think that is about it. You can comment down below if I've forgotten anyone, but essentially your two best options for stunning are Erdrick, who's very common, very good, obviously, but it's not guaranteed, and Mecha Miner, who again, it's far from guaranteed, but you can fit him in a lot of teams. And so that leaves you outside of stun with paralysis at 60% rate. Again, Burning Breath scrolls are common, but that 60% again, there's no guarantee on that. 40% of the time, it's not going to paralyze him. And again, if you went for paralysis, if you were relying on a paralysis to deal with Xenlon, you didn't land it, odds are you're going to lose. And then the other option is charming him, unless you're running Summer Jess, odds are you're not going to land this, or unless you can single target him with Godmir's Side Spark, which again is fairly unlikely, you're probably not going to status him. And even if you do manage to land the one turn status, stun and paralysis, you still only have one turn after that to break his remaining damage barriers and actually kill him before his turn comes around again. Which is why it's so... what makes him so powerful is the fact that you don't get 2 turns to do that. Unless you're lucky, unless you land Lucky Snooze, you don't get 2 turns to burn those barriers down. You don't get 2 turns to finally kill him after burning those barriers. You have 1 turn to do that. And he's still got teammates you need to deal with. And also, if we look at the scrolls that you actually get, these are the scrolls that are available in the real-time arena shop. As you can see, we get 2 forms of sleep. We get Sweet Breath, we get Snooze, we get 2 of these scrolls each. So sleep is extremely prevalent. Being half resistant to this is extremely important because odds are every team is running at least one of these scrolls. It's by far the most prevalent status. He's immune to Fuddle, another extremely prominent status because it's in the real-time arena shop. Anyone can have this, they can slap it on pretty much any unit. Paralysis, he's neutral to this. So this is a decent threat to him, but again, it's not guaranteed. And then they did finally this season, they added a tongue lashing scroll, which can stun. But I think you'll notice a difference here between the tongue lashing scroll and all these. All of these are 3 range. They can hit a unit 3 tiles away. Stun, tongue lashing is only 1 range. So you can only hit a unit 1 range away, and you can only hit 1 unit with it, which limits it severely. I mean, the odds of you being in range to actually use this on Xenlon go down significantly, and the odds of being able to apply it go down as well. I'm honestly not sure why they treat the paralysis and stun scrolls so differently. Like this has the potential to paralyze up to 3 units and can hit a unit 3 tiles away, and stun can only hit 1 unit 1 tile away, even though they effectively do exactly the same thing. They just take away a unit's action for the turn. But yeah, so this would have been, if they'd have made this a 3 range option, like a 3 range stun, this would have been really good for mitigating Xenlon. You could put this on any unit and be able to guarantee to take Xenlon out of action for 1 turn, which would have been an amazing option instead of having to rely on damage or rely on RNG to actually stun him. But instead they made it 1 range, so this unfortunately doesn't really mitigate him that much. Like it's fairly rare that you'd actually get to be in range to use this on him, because I mean he could be surrounded by other teammates, which mean you can't get to him, or you just couldn't reach him in general. So overall, he has 3 damage barriers that make him difficult to kill, and makes you want to be able to CC him, because you're like, well, I don't want to burn 3 actions just to kill this guy when he's got teammates. You know, I want to put him out of commission. I want to focus on the teammates. But he's difficult to CC. You can't really do that. You know, there's no reliable way for you to CC him for 2 turns, because he's half resistant to sleep and immune to confusion. And Charm is extremely rare unless you're running Summer Jessica, or you know, maybe you don't have Summer Jessica. And the most reliable form of 1-turn CC is Stun, except that's a pretty rare status to have, and the best users of it don't really have a guaranteed way to stun. But you know, again, just being hard to kill and hard to CC, if that was enough to make a unit overpowered, then another unit would be overpowered, and that would be Erdrick. He is extremely bulky, and he's in fact immune to CC. So now that we've looked at the defensive options, we should take a look at the offensive options and see if that is what is enough to push Xenlon into being overpowered. Breath is the best attack type. Now I've put up a table here to show the differences between each of the attack types. With physical, you can crit, which is great. You can miss, which is not great. You have 2 different ways to buff it, which is great, but you can also have the damage mitigated or avoided altogether in 4 different ways. You can raise your defense, you can raise your physical resistance, you can have evasion, or you can run high agility and make it likely that they miss. Martial, you can crit, not good. You can miss, also not good. There's only one way to buff it, which is martial potency, which is obviously not as good as attack. And it can be mitigated with martial res, which is pretty rare, evasion, and agility, like physical. If we look at spells, you can crit, which is good. You can miss, which is also good. There's 2 ways to buff it, which is also good. And then mitigating it, we have spell resistance, bounce, and Mahost or snub, which is coming soon with solo. The reason I list that and don't list other more niche things like Wildcard or Amon coming soon, who have a physical reflect and martial reflect respectively, is because, well, A, solo is more likely to be way more omnipresent, and also solo can apply this snub to any unit in the game. It's not specific to him. If he's on the team, he can apply it to anybody, so it can be relevant on anybody. And then we look at breath. It can't crit, not great. It can't miss, that is great. Only one way to buff it, breath potency, but also only one way to mitigate, and that's important. Outside of Nemean, who's immune to breath, there is only one way to mitigate breath, and that is by applying breath resistance. And there's also only one relevant user of breath that can apply breath resistance, and that's Summer Seraphy. I think that the Ice Sculpture unit also has Insulate or Insulator. But yeah, there's only one way in this meta, essentially, to apply breath resistance, and that's Summer Seraphy. And if we look at all the other attack types, there are multiple ways to mitigate the damage. And so the key thing here really is the reliability of breath and the fact that it is so hard to mitigate. As I say, unless you're running Summer Seraphy, there is really no way to mitigate breath damage. It can't miss, and you can't really apply any resistance to dodge it. You could say, for spell, you know, spell resistance is fairly rare. We have the armor that can rarely apply it. We have Diamond Slime that can apply it. We have Moogle that can apply it. But we also have some meta bounce units. Santa Elena just got a Blossom. She's become a lot more popular. Maldragora has always been popular and probably won't drop off anytime soon. We're getting the Sorrow Manslayer Blossom pretty soon. He's going to become very meta. He has Spell Reflect. And Wolfspade, he can also be run with Spell Reflect. He's probably the best A rank you can run, or one of the best A ranks you can run. And then, as I say, solo coming soon with that Mahost. Martial resistance is very rare, but Martial has to contend with evasion, and it has to contend with agility differences. If you run a martial unit slower than your opponent, then you have to chance a miss, which makes it far less reliable. Same with attack. It has to contend with evasion. It has to be faster than the unit is attacking or it was missing, and it has to contend with defense and buff scrolls, ironclad defense, defensive stance, and passively raising defense are pretty common. Whereas with breath, you're never going to miss. and unless Summer Seraphim applies breath resistance to something, then there's no real way to get that breath resistance. There are two meta units that do get breath resistance at Awakening 5, and that's Jamiris and Summer Seraphim. But those units are also extremely weak to Xenlon. Jamiris is weak to Frizz and Crack, so he gets melted by Aurora Breath, and Summer Seraphim gets almost melted by Aurora Breath. I think she can just about live at Awakening 5. So that is what, for PvP at least, is what makes Breath by far the best attack type. You can't really mitigate the damage, and it's always reliable. Like, you're never going to get RNG'd out of it because you missed like a 96% attack. In PvE, physical and spells are better generally because they have the potential to be buffed much higher by buffing your allies and debuffing the enemy. But for PvP, Breath is king. There's also another thing about Martial and Breath units that is pretty great, and that is that they don't have to have their stats split off into attack or wisdom. If we look here at Greynar and Barbarous, I mean, Greynar is way better than Barbarous for a bunch of reasons, but one of the reasons is Barbarous was made a mixed breath and physical attacker, whereas Greynar was just a pure breath attacker. And if we look at the stat distribution here, we can see that meant that Greynar got about 50 extra HP, 100 plus defense, and 30 extra agility, because Barbarous had to have some of his stats siphoned away and put into attack to keep his attack relevant, you know? And generally, I mean, there's no unit that doesn't want more HP, that doesn't want more agility, that doesn't want more defense. Like, having more of those things is pretty much always a good thing. And so if you have to have your stats split off into those things, it's worse. And it also means that when you're running equipment, you can just run full HP, you can just run full agility and not see any drawback in your damage. Whereas if you're running a physical attacker or a spellcaster, if you run something that isn't whiz based or attack based, then you're going to see your damage drop off a little bit. And now let's move on to the one thing that I think pushes this all over the edge, because, as I've spoken about, the defensive capabilities, is comparable to Erdrick. The breath capability as a general attack type, there's a lot of breath units, obviously. Greynar is also, an amazing unit. It has, amazing resistances, it has huge bulk, and it has some great breath attacks. So there's got to be something else about Xenlon that might push it over the edge, and that, in my opinion, is Aurora Breath. This attack it's just way too good, in my opinion. It's so good to the point where, like, you don't need to really think when you press this move. You don't need to activate a single neuron. You just need to send Xenlon forward, hit Aurora Breath, and really good things are going to happen for you. Already spoken about how difficult it is to mitigate damage, and Aurora Breath just takes that to like the highest level you possibly think of. Like, this move has been designed so that there is essentially no real counterplay to it. The base damage is 250, which is the equivalent of a Conflagrator Breath from Greynar, except obviously this is hitting 9 squares, and Conflag only hits 1 square. You can't reliably mitigate the damage by avoiding the breath, because the range is so large. It's a large fan. So, I'm sure if you've played any real-time arena, you'll know that finding a starting position that Xenlon can't hit with this is pretty much impossible. Depending on where he starts, I'm pretty sure he can reach pretty much every square in the game, every square on the map with this ability. And, Xenlon isn't the only unit that has a large fan attack. Bianca has a large fan attack, but that's mitigated by the fact that it's just zap type, and it's physical, and its potency is quite low for a physical attack, presumably to compensate for the fact that it's hitting such a large area. No such compensation in the damage here, unfortunately. You also cannot reliably mitigate damage with resistances, because it's a dual element attack, and resisting both Frizz and Crack is extremely rare outside of Young Terry and Bianca. So even if, let's say, you're hitting a Purvis, heavy resist Crack, neutral to Frizz, he's still taking about 800 damage, most likely, which is, that's not something you can shrug off. Like, if you resist Frizz and Greynar hits you with Conflag, you can shake that off. Like, that's really not going to change much. But since this is dual element, you can't, unless you resist both, you're going to take a ton of damage from this Aurora Breath. And so this is what I mean, is that the range is insane, so you can't stand outside of the range most times. It's breath, so you can't really mitigate the damage with resistances most of the time. And it's dual element, so you can resist the damage by using resistances most of the time. So there's no real way for you to avoid all this damage. So this, paired with the fact that, he's so difficult to CC reliably, he's so difficult to kill, I think pushes him slightly over the edge, especially when we consider the very final thing, which is this Awakening 3 perk, which is plus 20% damage when above 50% HP. I personally have an Awaken 1 Xenlon, and I use it in real-time arena a lot. And he, at Awakening 1, he doesn't quite feel overpowered. When I go for Aurora Breath, there's a ton of units that that would die at Awakening 3 that don't die at Awakening 1, and I think that's balanced. If you're going for an attack that hits so many squares, that is so powerful, that is so difficult to mitigate, I think it's fair that it's not just like cleaving and killing everything it sees. But Awakening 3 with that plus 20% damage, which Awakening 3 they also get plus 5% potency on Aurora Breath, so this is really plus 25% damage to Aurora Breath. I think that is what pushes over the edge, and so I would say that Xenlon in his current state and the current state of the meta, Xenlon is slightly overpowered. And I think if they took away his Awakening 3 perk, if they swapped that for Dragon Scale and then made his Awakening 5 perk like MP regen or plus 10% bind chance, I think that could go a long way to balancing him. If they just cut down on Aurora Breath in some way, if they made it a regular fan instead of a large fan, if they made it monotype, if they just cut the numbers a little bit, then he wouldn't be able to kill 2 units and deal 50% to 2 others in a single attack. And I just think his ability to deal that AoE damage, like I say, Godly Breath is absolutely amazing ability, but it's single target, it's not single-handedly just cleaving through a whole team. Aurora Breath's ability to do that without any real way to mitigate it is a bit too strong in my opinion, and I would like to see them introduce a few more, breath counters into the meta, although most recently we've had revealed is a unit that actually benefits breath units, so I'll have to wait a bit longer for that. But yeah, this is my analysis of Xenlon if he's overpowered. Let me know if you agree in the comments or if you disagree, and hope you enjoyed watching. Thank you.